It's Thursday, the 28th of December, 1989. Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia's sixth largest city, gathers momentum following the calm of Christmas. It's a time for holiday makers, family reunions and bargain hunters. The city centre is unusually quiet because of a bus strike. At the government bus depot, drivers are returning for a stop-work meeting. NBN television reporter Ross Hampton and cameraman Stuart Osland are chasing comment from a local union official over the safety of one of the buses in the fleet. For them, it seems like a straightforward assignment.
Russo, stand by.
Sure thing.
Mate, away go.
All right, well, I guess we should start with 28.05, Donnie. Are you happy with that situation now?
Situation the way it is now at 28.05 looks like it has been resolved. The high speed diff will be taken out of the bus and it'll be no longer be doing 100 kilometres an hour.
3.5 minutes later, the concerns are eclipsed by something much bigger.
We hope that something good comes out of this.
Union management relations, though, how would you describe them?
Terrible. Oh.
Mate, let's go call the two-way at work immediately. Here, race back, get into the car. Don't worry about me, I'll follow you.
Get those bricks, see if they come on.
Yep. In the whole building where we were just over. Bryce, get the car, bring it down, mate.
Come down the ambulance station.
While I was playing tennis.
A few blocks away, a brick wall has been punched out at ambulance headquarters in Hamilton.
There's been an explosion.
No, around town.
Yeah, they're around town.
The realisation dawns that damage has not been confined to just a few brick walls. Could it be mine subsidence in the honeycombed earth beneath the city? Has there been an explosion in the city's gas mains? Or worse, fears surface of an explosion at the giant Newcastle BHP steelworks.
No.
Don't look at me.
Let's make up people working at BHP. Move it away, thanks. Go on.
Are you away?
Yes. Get the mic up tight.
Well, this is Beaumont Street, Hamilton, just minutes after the blast or the explosion or the earthquake, and it looks as though a bomb has hit. Bombs have hit all along here. It's like a war scene. People are standing around just dazed. There has been some loss of life, it appears, and buildings all up and down the street have just collapsed into the roadway.
Just came underneath the buildings. Everything just flew off the walls, and it just, I don't know.
Did your building collapse?
No, we were really lucky. And I came out here and I noticed all of this.
Even here at the northern end of Beaumont Street, the Kent Hotel has been absolutely devastated, and there are people probably caught underneath the rubble here, but rescuers can't get to them because the wall overhead looks so unstable it could come down at any moment.
I've got 3 minor injuries here.
Right.
I'm not sure what's in the pub. I haven't been inside. We want to move something.
You're clear, are you? 103.
Yeah, well, Bruce has been sent to do that.
Glasses on tables were thrown all over the room, and at this stage there's a whole area of the Hunter Valley has been blacked out. Tony Briscoe reporting from Newcastle there, and as we told you before, the ambulance service is sending all available vehicles, perhaps a fixed-wing aircraft as well, to the Hunter region, where there are reports of several injuries.
On the corner in the...
All the buildings just shook and things caved in.
Staff room all caved in.
Staff room caved in. All the fixtures just sort of give way, stopped. Everything went everywhere.
It was very frightening. The lights all went out and all the terminals came down, and we saw things come down out the front. That's why we all rushed out the back.
In Beaumont Street, 3 people are dead and scores injured. Those killed were pedestrians, walking under awnings which collapsed and crushed them to death.
This probably seemed to be the worst hit area. Is
Newcastle.
Newcastle workers apparently just collapsed.
I was in Newcastle Workers Club, and the whole club just collapsed. Just about, yeah.
You were in the club?
Yeah.
What happened?
It just shook and everything just caved in.
The walls caved in?
Yeah, inside the club. Poker machines going down everywhere.
Nearer the city centre, the roof of the Newcastle Workers Club has caved in. More bodies are to be found entombed in the rubble as Australia's first killer earthquake unfolds. The initial response by emergency services was complicated by a breakdown in their communication systems and telephones, and within minutes they were stretched to their limits. Calls for help often delivered in person. Newcastle Hospital was being evacuated. The Tyers Hill TAFE College was on fire. The Newcastle RSL was teetering on the verge of collapse. Buildings were extensively damaged at the junction. In Islington, many are shattered. Throughout Cooks Hill, terrace houses had been ripped apart. But although their disaster training had not considered an earthquake, emergency services very quickly marshalled their resources where they were most needed. In the coming days, the Newcastle Workers Club became the focus of attention. 9 bodies would be dragged from the twisted concrete and steel.
Both walls of the auditorium were waving like sails in the wind, and I looked up and I could see the material falling down, and the reason for that was that the roof was coming, ceiling and the chandeliers.
Howard Gibson has been a cleaner at the club for 22 years. He was in the main auditorium preparing for a big rock concert when the quake struck.
First of all, there's this terrible shaking, and then the ceiling material coming down and raining down like confetti. I first thought was to duck for cover, and because again you talk about 1 or 2 seconds, I suppose, and then of course this terrible fear of well, there's concrete coming down as well, you know, and bricks falling away and so forth. And I thought, well, this could well be it. I thought I might, you know, that my number was up.
Not much we can do.
place shook. Everybody got thrown onto the floor. It sounded like a big bang, I thought, and then the shaking. And I thought, oh, it must be a bomb going off. And I asked one of the girls, and she said, there's a bomb going off.
She's all right.
She's up that way. She's up there. She's something up there. Straight ahead.
That makes sense to anybody? Right. Hemo, melon, sutton. What was the other one? We had the Century Theatre at Broadmeadow.
Not Workers Club, the other club, RSL.
Yeah, the RSL at down in town, wasn't it? We had a roof collapse there, but hopefully there's nobody in there. They shouldn't be in there at this stage. They should have already got out. So we're hoping that that situation is right, but I can't update you on it.
Would you say the Workers Club was the worst hit?
Well, I can't even tell you that. Honestly, I can't. But it seems to me that there was a lot of people who were in the club at the time, but exactly how many we don't know.
With the collapse of the support walls, the roof came crushing down. Like dominoes, the floors beneath collapsed under the weight. The concertina effect ended at the car park below. More than 50 ambulances were rushed to Newcastle from Sydney and the Central Coast. There was calm and a professional sense of duty amongst those rescue services personnel. With resources taxed to extremes not experienced before, Newcastle was lucky that this scene of human loss was not repeated elsewhere in the city. The grass median strip soon became a makeshift hospital, with doctors and nurses improvising with first aid. These were the kind of conditions usually reserved for a war zone. Leslie Irwin, a nurse at Royal Newcastle Hospital, was at home when she heard the news from a neighbour. For the first 4 hours, she was the only woman treating injured inside the rubble.
Immediately all nurses are on call for any disaster, so I just threw my uniform on and went into town, and I went past the Workers Club to see if it was true, and there were only a couple of ambulances there at the stage when I got there. So I yelled out to the fellow who seemed to be coordinating the services, and he asked me to stay and to go in and start helping with some of the people, because at that stage they were unaware of how many people were trapped and how many were hurt, and people from the actual employees of the Workers Club were bringing people out, so it was difficult to gauge how many casualties there were at that stage. At first up, I went up the stairs to the ground level where the poker machines are, and we found one fellow alive there but trapped by his ankle, so we started an IV going at him to give him some fluids. We were about halfway through getting him out, and he was fairly stable, and then they yelled out that they'd found 4 more people alive down in the rubble, I think in the car park or basement level. It was difficult to tell, it was all one. So we went down there and we found 3 people visible. Another girl was off to the left-hand side, hidden behind poker machines, but she was reasonable. And the 3 older people that we could see were really caught under a lot of rubble. It wasn't just bricks and debris, there was roof sections holding their legs and poker machines on some of the people. So we knew the task ahead was really going to be a long one.
Bedlam in there. It's just, it's just junk and concrete and everything everywhere. There was people everywhere, and just had to do what we could. We find each person as we came to them. There was people behind other people as well, so it was just a mess.
Warnings by earthquake experts that a severe aftershock could follow the quake hampered rescue operations for a short time.
Okay, well, I think at this stage we've got to keep away from the buildings. We've got to try and keep everybody out.
I believe there's a fear there's going to be a second tremor.
Yes, there is a possible. That is possible. We're taking precautions for that. I think what we've got to do now is to make sure people realise that they won't have time to run. This thing will hit, and you won't have time to. You'll only have time to blink your eye. So they've got to move.
What stage have rescue operations reached now?
Well, the situation is that we've got a lot of people out. I've got a list here of all the people that we've got out so far. I'm just counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I got 13 people who've been taken out so far and are in a satisfactory condition. As far as I know, there is 1 possible dead, but not confirmed at this stage. And there is a lot of other people trapped. We don't know how many.
One of the most incredible entrap situations I've worked in, and to see those people the way they were there, hopelessly trapped under bricks, rubble and poker machines.
There was one elderly gentleman that we were working on, when we first got there, he was fully conscious. We just simply couldn't get his legs out, and unfortunately he bled to death while we were there. And there's another one very similar that we've just pulled out that's suffered a cardiac arrest. I don't know his status at the moment. He had, the elderly gentleman had such massive leg injuries that I doubt whether he would have survived. He just bled to death.
As rescue operations swung to roof level, emergency crews, construction workers, office staff and passers-by formed a human chain to clear a way, brick by brick, to those still trapped.
Big one. You can spread it out a bit if you like.
The Workers' Club was the scene of the greatest loss of life in the Newcastle quake, but damage was widespread throughout the city. At a time when demand for medical attention was at its highest, the hospitals did not escape structural damage. At Royal Newcastle Hospital, hundreds of patients were evacuated with fears that older buildings could tumble. Patients were treated under tents, pitched beside the beach. Newcastle's other major public hospital, the Mater Misericordia, suffered huge cracks to its brick walls. Patients were moved out. Those in intensive care were kept alive with emergency power generators. From the Mater Hospital, the huge Newcastle steelworks could be seen. Plumes of smoke poured into the air as the plant began an emergency shutdown procedure. Gases from the coke ovens were burnt off as the power blacked out. Early fears that there'd been an explosion at the plant were unfounded. The Technical College at Tyers Hill was hit by the full force of the quake. Chemicals in the laboratory wing ignited, causing a serious fire. Built on alluvial soil, the shockwave passed through the campus, crumbling buildings in its wake. Remarkably, although some 500,000 people were jolted by the quake, just 12 were to lose their lives, while some 100 were injured. The timing undoubtedly saved many. Schools were also closed for the summer vacation. There's no telling how many would have been injured or killed had these classrooms been full of children. Within hours of the quake, Prime Minister Hawke was inspecting the Workers' Club site, breaking his summer vacation and promising federal government assistance. State Premier Nick Greiner flew back from Hawaii. With more than 100 public buildings damaged in some way, his job was going to be a tough and expensive one in the months to follow. Late in the day, there was a subtle but important change in the approach taken by rescue workers. Cave experts, using heat-sensing devices, crawled amongst the wreckage in the hope that someone may still be found alive. Hopes quickly faded, and the rescue turned to demolition, an operation which went on around the clock. Stories of great courage and bravery always emerge after tragedy. Norm Duffy's quiet heroism was typical. He lay trapped in the Workers' Club for 5 hours before he was released. Despite massive injuries, he held the hands of 2 women lying nearby, offering comfort and support. Rescue workers have praised Norm for the way he held on as they worked to free him. Norm's wife of 38 years, Miriam, was killed by falling rubble.
Norm, you've gone through so much, yet you're still smiling. How do you manage to...
That's false, man. False. I'm trying to avoid that, the other thing, like, you know, till I get out. Either way.
Patrick Murray was a roadie, setting up for the rock concert scheduled for that evening. Had the quake struck during that concert, some 2,500 young people would have been in this auditorium, a situation almost too horrific to consider. Patrick rushed to a backstage room as the auditorium began to shake. Remembering the survivors of the San Francisco quake boosted his morale.
Thought about, you know, those people in San Francisco, how they survived in those cars all that time, so I decided just to relax, stay calm, and try and conserve as much energy as I could.
Mary Ironman was a regular of the club, enjoying a weekly game of Hoy. Arriving early, she was playing the pokies. Minutes later, she was lying dazed and trapped.
The trouble is you don't know whether you're going to be saved or not until you see the light where they are coming in. Because everything was piled up on top of you, everything was black. You know, having your life compared to the others that are gone, biggest jackpot in the world.
Runa McElwain was playing the poker machine next to Mary. 4 days later, she was sharing the hospital bed next to Mary.
I was just going to put some more 5 cents in after winning the jackpot. I was going to put some more into the machine. And it danced in front of me and all these bricks came from everywhere. And they all went under me and I fell back onto them. That's how I've fractured my spine.
Great relief also for Jacqueline Rowe, who was injured when the Kent Hotel awning in Beaumont Street collapsed on her and her 2 babies. She managed to push 10-month-old Alana to safety, but cries for help from 23-month-old PJ still haunt her.
I just kept screaming out for PJ, you know, like if he was mum, mum. And I just kept screaming for someone to help me get him out. And then 5 young guys come along and they said, what's the matter? I said, look, my son's under all that. All I could see when he was there was this little boy laying on the ground with all this stuff over him. I thought he was dead. I'm still trying to forget it, but I can't do that. Especially when you've got a 23-month-old baby that nearly died from it.
While his mother may never forget those terrible moments, miraculously PJ escaped his ordeal virtually unscathed. This earthquake is different to others which hit Australia. The damage was recorded over an unusually wide area. 24 kilometres due west of the city centre, the township of Holmesville was rocked. No one was killed, but the stories of damage to buildings and broken dreams are typical of those experienced across the affected districts.
Just a lifetime if you see your kids when they were born flash in front of your face and the growing up stages. And when it's gone, how do you remember it?
Do you have any insurance?
We have no insurance at all, nothing. And my husband's and my age to try and restart and build from here, I don't know where we'll go. I've got no idea. We've got our ground and that's it. And I've got my kids and my family. That's the main thing.
The head of the geology department at Newcastle University, Professor Ian Plimer.
What had happened was that the rocks in continental Australia have been taking up a lot of strain for a long period of time, and eventually the rocks will break, and that breakage was quite coincidentally under a highly populated area.
Why so much damage in Newcastle?
There are a number of reasons for that. The first reason was that it was a very, very shallow earthquake, really quite unusual. And the second thing was that a lot of the damage was due to the fact that the buildings in the Hamilton area were built on the old bed of the Hunter River. And when a shockwave goes through these unconsolidated sands, it accelerates, and so the buildings will suffer much more damage. In fact, the buildings close to the epicentre that didn't suffer much damage were built on rock, or built on areas under which there'd been mining, and the mining had taken all the stresses out of the rock, and these areas just didn't undergo enormous damage.
There are no seismograph stations in Newcastle. This was the last place one would expect an earthquake to strike. And yet history shows Newcastle has been hit by earthquakes many times before. In 1886 and 1925, quakes about 5 on the Richter scale were felt, but little damage was reported. Beth Chamberlain was just 9 years old, but remembers the quake of 1925.
The walls were moving, and I heard the rumbling underneath, and then my mother and my aunt raced in to see if I was all right. And it was a very scary experience, and I think that's what's made it stay in my mind for so long, because I've mentioned it many times over the years to different ones.
What did you think it was in the first occasion?
I didn't know, I suppose because I was too young. Really, it was just something you didn't know.
What about the amount of damage from that first quake? Was there much?
No, there wasn't any. It would be like a very severe tremor, I'd say, but nothing like this one.
The 1989 quake was the biggest this century on the east coast of Australia.
It's at least magnitude 5.5 on the Richter scale, and I would say that it was larger than the 1961 Robertson earthquake and the 1973 Picton earthquake.
Dr. David Denham heads the Bureau of Mineral Resources in Canberra.
The history of earthquake occurrence in southeast Australia is pretty irregular over the last 200 years. The first fleet was only ashore in Sydney by a month or so before they felt an earthquake. And in fact, several small earthquakes have been felt from time to time since that occasion.
The Newcastle quake was recorded at the Bureau Centre in Canberra. The parallel lines interrupted the telltale peaks. The centre records an earthquake like this one about once a year, somewhere on the east coast of Australia. About 500 strike each year around the world. But all the technical equipment available to scientists cannot predict when or where these quakes will next be felt.
Highly unlikely that Newcastle would have another earthquake. We have had sporadic earthquakes all through Australia. We have had something like 500 of these type of earthquakes every year in the world. the chances of Newcastle having another one are very slim for a number of reasons, that the area has already undergone a strain release. And the second thing is that these earthquakes just occur in a spotty pattern all over Australia. We've had similar major earthquakes in some of the underpopulated areas of Australia. It was just an unfortunate coincidence that it was in a populated area and very shallow.
An aftershock was recorded 10 minutes after the big one, although most people were too distracted to feel it. A second tremor was felt on the following evening. These shocks helped seismologists track down the epicentre, 13 kilometres under Cardiff, southwest of the city centre. The quake was some 10 kilometres beneath the deepest mine, so there were worries for the hundreds of miners working underground in the Hunter Valley's rich coal-producing districts. Instead of scenes of great devastation, scientists claim the coal mines actually helped Newcastle survive.
The fact that Newcastle has mines underneath it, in fact, made the damage a lot less, because the mining has reduced a lot of the stress out of the rocks, and that loss of stress meant that these rocks could actually take a lot of the earthquake energy. The second thing is that the mines are very, very well designed mechanically, and under normal conditions we don't get many rock falls, so it really made no effect at all to the underground mines. The underground mines have actually helped the city of Newcastle.
There was one instance, however, where the presence of coal mines created a subsidence problem of huge proportions. In the suburb of Bar Beach, a living room was literally sucked away. Indirectly, the quake was to blame.
Well, basically, you have an air shaft from an old mine working. That was, when it was completed, the mining there, it was capped with concrete. When the building was built over that, there was a concrete slab put over that. From what we understand, what's happened, water from the water table as a result of the earthquake has been pushed up. It's lifted that concrete plug and then it's sucked back down. And you can see from the damage around, and particularly out the front, that everything around the house and particularly in here has then been sucked in to the hole.
In the days that followed, thousands of tons of concrete were poured into the hole to try and cap the gaping chasm. But structural damage is now something thousands of building and homeowners are coming to terms with. Just why so many awnings in Newcastle collapsed can be explained in terms of structural engineering. It appears a council building code in 1928 ordered all support posts be removed, with concerns over increased car traffic on our roads. Tie support rods took their place.
The awnings were held back by tie rods. The tie rod was only fixed into the brickwork with a 4 to 6 inch diameter bolt only in the brickwork. Above that particular fixing point, typically it seemed that there was a parapet which was unstable due to lead flashing in it. And so when the shake came through, the brickwork above the flashing fell over onto the awning. The load of the brickwork on the awning pulled the bolt out of the tie rod, and hence the awning was then unstable and collapsed down into the street.
The aftershocks left a psychological impact on an expectant community much greater than any subsequent damage to buildings. Experts are divided on whether a quake can strike here again. Some believe that the occurrence of quakes clusters over time. Others believe another quake soon is unlikely.
The Earth is a bit like a tortoise shell with all the platelets moving, and they're either pulling apart in the mid-ocean ridge areas where we get earthquakes and volcanoes, or pushing together as we get, say, in Japan or New Zealand or Chile, and sometimes sliding past each other as we have in San Francisco. Australia sits in the middle of one of these plates, whereas in the western US we're getting a sliding motion. Now in the middle of the plates it's a very, very unusual phenomenon to get an earthquake. They are unpredictable and we don't know when they're going to happen and where they are, but they are really fairly minor. About 5% of the world's earthquakes occur within the plates. So it really is a very, very unusual.
Initial shock of the earthquake came important practical considerations. Which buildings had been left structurally unsafe? Which had to be demolished? Which could be repaired? Teams of demolishers moved in, changing the landscape in a matter of days. The junction motor inn, its back broken in the quake, was dramatically askew. Overnight, it was reduced to rubble. Today, all that remains is a vacant block. The inner city Newcastle RSL club suffered a roof collapse in the quake. Remarkably, no one was hurt. Hours later, the upstairs rooms would have been packed with patrons. It too was brought down. In a stroke of luck, the club had recently upgraded its insurance policy. In Broadmeadow, the best-known landmark, the former Century Theatre, was deemed beyond repair. The home of the Christian Revival Centre, the solid brick building was cleared to the ground. Just across the railway line, the Broadway Hotel suffered a similar fate. But while the demolitions were dramatic, the quake took its toll on many other buildings in varying degrees. In the city centre alone, this map shows the extent of that damage. The black buildings being demolished, the others suffering some kind of damage. An early count by Newcastle City Council shows 3,300 residential properties reporting damage, and more than 1,200 commercial properties also affected. Royal Newcastle Hospital's North and York wings were evacuated minutes after the quake. This put 200 hospital beds out of use. The York wing has been earmarked for demolition for some time. The North wing will be preserved for its heritage value, but will not be used again to treat patients.
There's no chance of using, for health purposes, the North and York wings again. They are irreparably damaged and $27 million short of current standards of refurbishment.
$6 million in damage was reported at the John Hunter Hospital under construction at Rankin Park. However, this will not affect the commissioning date of January 1991. The argument over preservation of old buildings surfaced as demolition crews started work on the George Hotel in Scott Street and the Carrington Chambers next door. The building owners had been told by engineers that both must come down. Conservation groups did not agree and wanted to save the buildings, but the argument of public safety won the day. Damage extended into the suburbs as well, with brick chimneys often the first casualty. Many homes lost parts of their roofs, some still covered only by tarpaulins put in place by the State Emergency Service. Volunteer crews answered more than 4,000 calls for help in the first weeks after the quake.
We had it over a period of time, about 1,500 SES personnel from Newcastle, Maitland, Upper Hunter and Sydney working to assist us. And most of those people worked shifts of about 48 hours and worked really hard. I think it's somewhat difficult for people to realise that there are people in the community who are prepared to work for nothing. And the response from the SES was in fact overwhelming.
A disaster relief centre was set up at Broadmeadow High School to provide food and shelter for those worst affected. Coordinated by the Department of Family and Community Services, this centre became a focal point for social care.
If anyone has their food vouchers, if you wish to go on the bus to Coles to collect your food, the bus is leaving in the next 5 minutes.
In the following 3 weeks, the centre processed 13,800 appeals for help. 300 families were made homeless. Another 1,500 had to find short-term accommodation until their homes were made safe. It's expected that 30,000 homes and businesses across the Newcastle district will be the subject of insurance claims. Repair costs are expected to be higher than those faced by Darwin after Cyclone Tracy. One of the first responses by authorities was to effectively close the city centre and Beaumont Street. Barricades were erected around dangerous buildings and roads were closed. Police and troops manned the blockades, allowing only those with special passes into the city. There was a rush on those passes when police announced they'd be handing them out to anyone who was eligible.
We've got to get in to Denison Street. Get some files.
Has got some identification?
Yep.
Our office is closed, so we have to get to Data Street.
4 days after, the city fell silent. Images of a deserted Hunter Street on what should have been a busy day were reserved for those with access. Tempers were frayed as people realised how much of their city had been shut down.
One has to explain at every block why why you're moving within the city. And it just feels a bit like you're a prisoner.
New Year's Eve was like no other experienced in Newcastle. Inner city residents shared the moment with newfound neighbours. Impromptu street parties were held on the closed roads. But for some, it meant a lonely vigil, bringing in the new year at work.
Yeah, 1 on 10, just the location of that quarter tracking on 10. To the corner of Denison and Beaumont Street at Exchange Hotel. Do they want me to bring it to the...
News of the Newcastle quake was beamed around Australia and around the world.
It was the first fatal earthquake ever in Australia. The quake registered 5.5 on the Richter scale. It was felt from Melbourne to Sydney. Hardest hit, the old steel mill city of Newcastle, about 75 miles north of Sydney and just a few miles east of the epicenter.
The epicenter of the quake, which measured 5.5 on the Richter scale, was just 18 kilometres west of Newcastle. The tremors, which lasted nearly a minute...
The quake hit at mid-morning, flattening dozens of buildings.
Are still missing. The worst hit area, the city of Newcastle, about 75 miles north of Sydney. We have a live report now from John Church of NBN Television in Newcastle. John.
Thank you, Tricia. The situation here is that about 24 hours ago, an earthquake of the strength of 5.6 on the Richter scale struck this east coast city of Australia. Nobody expected an earthquake. There's no history.
Eastern Australia is recovering from a big earthquake tonight. That quake hit 5.5 on the Richter scale, and it was centered near Newcastle, 80 miles to the north of Sydney.
When Newcastle's Lord Mayor launched a special relief fund, money poured in. Already more than $3 million has been raised. This means the most needy victims of the quake will not do without. The spirit of the city was boosted in this time of need with the knowledge that the rest of Australia cared. Now Newcastle has begun the long process of rebuilding. Not only the many physical aspects, but the social and spiritual as well. Christchurch Cathedral, itself damaged by the quake, was the venue for a special service of commemoration and renewal. Candles were lit for those who died.
Newcastle people are tough and resilient. They are not strangers to hardship. And as a result of this earthquake, we will have the chance not only to recover, but to renew both ourselves and our community. And our suffering will strengthen our resolve to make for a better future.
The time-tested qualities of the people of Newcastle came to the fore with this earthquake. Rather than dwell on the problems, solutions are already being found. With many lessons learnt, Newcastle can be proud that its response to this disaster was swift and professional. The road to recovery is also full of promise. An optimistic vision for the future is shared by the people of Newcastle and the Lord Mayor, Alderman John McNaughton.
In the spirit of the community, we must make sure that people go forward with great confidence that they are part of a strong, caring, committed society. And that's what Newcastle always has been. It will take time, we require care, we require understanding, but we are going to do the job. And that is where the vision, my vision for the city is, where everybody knows that they're cared for. And with that, we have an absolutely incredible future.
It looks as though a bomb has hit. Bombs have hit all along here. It's like a war scene. People are standing around just dazed. There has been some loss of life, it appears, and buildings all up and down the street have just collapsed into the roadway.
From Newcastle there, and as we told you before, the ambulance service is sending all available vehicles, perhaps a fixed-wing aircraft as well, to the Hunter region, where there are reports of several injuries.
just shook. Everybody got thrown onto the floor. It sounded like a big bang. And I thought, and then the shaking. And I thought, oh, it must be a bomb going off. And I asked one of the girls, and she said, there's a bomb going off.
It wasn't just bricks and debris, there was roof sections holding their legs and poker machines on some of the people. So we knew the task ahead was really going to be a long one.
There was people everywhere, and just had to do what we could. Find each person as we came to them. There were people behind other people as well, so it was just a mess.
This has been a special NBN presentation.